The text message from my son Troy made my hands shake. 3 weeks after burying Frank, my husband of 45 years, I read, "Mom, start packing. The house has been sold." I stared at those cold words glowing on my phone screen. My chest tightened, but then I remembered what Frank had whispered to me during those final days in hospice. I smiled at the message, glancing at my already packed suitcases lined up in the hallway. Troy assumed they were for the senior living facility he had selected. They weren't my only bags. Frank and I met in college when we were both 19. He was studying finance, and I was pursuing a degree in education. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, held in my parents' backyard with only 50 guests. Frank always had a cautious approach to money. He wasn't stingy, just prudent and thoughtful about every dollar we spent. As a financial advisor, he saw too many people make catastrophic mistakes with their money, and he was determined we would never face such hardships. We bought our modest 3-bedroom home in Seattle when housing prices were still reasonable. Nothing fancy, just a solid house with a small yard, where I planted a garden every spring. Frank could have afforded something more impressive as his career advanced, but he always said, "Why spend money on extra space we don't need, Zoe? Better to save for the future." When Troy was born, our priorities shifted entirely to him. He was our only child, arriving after years of trying, and we poured everything into giving him opportunities. The best schools, summer camps, music lessons, sports equipment, whatever he needed. We lived below our means in other ways to ensure Troy would have advantages neither of us had growing up. I remember Troy as a sweet child with curious eyes and endless questions. He collected rocks and bugs, built elaborate forts in the backyard, and insisted on helping me bake cookies, even though he made a tremendous mess. Frank taught him to fish and took him camping, patiently explaining everything from how to tie knots to how stars form in the night sky. The change in Troy happened gradually, so subtle I barely noticed until it was complete. In high school, he became acutely aware of what other kids had. The brand of jeans mattered. The car you drove mattered. Where you vacationed mattered. Frank and I tried to instill better values, explaining that character counts more than possessions, but the message never seemed to stick. By college, Troy had fully embraced materialism. He complained about his ancient laptop, though it was only 2 years old. He was embarrassed by our basic house when friends visited. He chose his companions based on their parents' professions and addresses. Each time he came home, he seemed to be scanning our possessions with a critical eye, as if assessing their value rather than the memories attached to them. Then Troy met Heather during his junior year. She came from money and made no effort to hide her disdain for our simple lifestyle. The first time she visited our home, I caught her wrinkling her nose at our comfortable but worn living room furniture. "Vintage is back in style," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Troy looked mortified. After graduation, they married in an extravagant ceremony that cost her parents a small fortune. Heather wore a designer gown that cost more than our first car. The reception featured ice sculptures and a 7-piece band. Frank whispered to me during the reception, "I hope they're not putting this on credit cards." I squeezed his hand, sharing his concern. They bought a house they clearly couldn't afford in an upscale neighborhood. 2 luxury cars sat in the driveway. Vacations to exotic locations filled their social media feeds, all while Troy worked at an entry-level position at a marketing firm and Heather bounced between jobs she quickly grew bored with. Frank worried constantly about their finances, but knew better than to interfere. "They'll have to learn the hard way," he said one night as we got ready for bed. "Some lessons can't be taught, only experienced." I nodded, but my heart ached for the struggles I knew lay ahead for them. Then came the diagnosis. Frank had been feeling tired, losing weight without trying. Tests revealed stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor gave him 6 months. He made it to 5. During those precious final months, I expected Troy to step up, to be present, to support his father who had given him everything. Instead, his visits were brief and infrequent. When he did come, he spent more time looking through our house than sitting with Frank. One afternoon, I returned from the pharmacy to find Troy and Heather in our home office, opening drawers and examining papers. "Just helping organize Dad's affairs," Troy explained smoothly. I said nothing, but later mentioned it to Frank. He wasn't surprised. "They're cataloging what they think they'll inherit," he said softly. "I've noticed things too. Questions about investments. Comments about furniture pieces they've always admired. They even asked if my grandfather's watch was still in the safe deposit box." I was stunned. "Frank, surely they wouldn't." "They already are," he interrupted gently. "But don't worry. I've made arrangements they know nothing about." That night, as Frank slept fitfully beside me, I noticed a small notebook on his nightstand. Inside, he had made a list of items in our home, with Troy's and Heather's initials next to certain pieces. He had been keeping track of everything they had expressed interest in, everything they assumed would soon be theirs. I closed the notebook and slipped it back onto the nightstand, a sick feeling in my stomach. My son was waiting for his father to die so he could claim his possessions. The thought broke my heart, but it also opened my eyes to a truth I had been avoiding for years. The sweet boy who once collected rocks and asked endless questions was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. One Tuesday morning, with Frank feeling stronger than usual, he asked me to drive him to his office. "There's something I need to show you," he said. I worried the trip would exhaust him, but he insisted. His longtime assistant Angela greeted us warmly, helping Frank to his private office and bringing us both tea. "Zoe," Frank said, once we were alone, "there are things I need to tell you about our finances, things I've kept separate from our regular accounts." My stomach tightened with worry. Had we been struggling financially all along? Had Frank made risky investments he'd kept from me? He must have read my expression because he smiled and reached for my hand. "Nothing bad, my love." Quite the opposite. Frank unlocked his desk drawer and removed a thick folder. 15 years ago, I started putting money into a separate account. I kept it quiet because I wanted it to be a surprise for our retirement. He slid several papers across the desk. "I bought us a small villa in Spain, near Valencia. It's walking distance to the Mediterranean, in a little community with lots of other expatriates." I stared at the photos of a charming white stucco house with a red tile roof and a bougainvillea-covered porch. "Frank, how? Why didn't you tell me?" At first, it was going to be a surprise for our 35th anniversary. But then I started noticing changes in Troy, and the surprise became something more strategic. He showed me more documents. "I've also set up a pension fund that will support you very comfortably for the rest of your life. Troy knows nothing about any of this." I struggled to process this information. "You've been planning for this for 15 years? Because of Troy?" Frank sighed deeply. I hoped I was wrong about him. I prayed I was. But a father knows his son. He looked at me with sad eyes. "Do you remember when Troy was in college and suddenly he paid off his student credit card, the one that was maxed out at $8,000? I nodded. He said he got a bonus at his summer job. "There was no bonus, Zoe. He took out a loan against our house using papers with forged signatures. My signature." The shock must have shown on my face because Frank quickly continued. "I discovered it by accident when the bank called to confirm some details. I paid it off immediately and never confronted him. I wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake, a desperate young man doing something stupid. Was it? I whispered, already knowing the answer. No, there were two more incidents. Each time, I paid off the debts without telling him I knew. Each time, I hoped he would change course. Frank's voice grew quieter. The last time was 3 years ago. $25,000. He and Heather took a trip to Bali with that money. My head was spinning. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you confront him? Because I was holding on to the hope that he would grow out of this phase, that the values we taught him would eventually resurface. Frank looked down at his thin hands. But mostly because I knew how much it would hurt you to know the truth. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. So you protected me all these years. And now I need to keep protecting you. Frank pulled out more papers. I've changed my will. The house and a modest savings account are all that will be mentioned at the reading. Everything else, including the villa and the pension fund, has been placed in trusts that will transfer directly to you upon my death. Angela is the executor and will help you manage everything. You think Troy would try to take that money too, I said. It wasn't a question. Frank looked at me with deep sorrow in his eyes. I know he would. I've watched him catalog our possessions while I'm lying in my sickbed, Zoe. I've seen the way he looks at me now, not as his father, but as an obstacle between him and what he thinks he deserves. The weight of this revelation crushed something inside me. My only child, the boy I had read stories to and comforted after nightmares, had become someone capable of stealing from his dying father. There's more, Frank said gently. Troy has already taken out another loan against the house. $50,000, 2 months ago, right after my diagnosis. I couldn't speak. The betrayal was too enormous to comprehend. I've paid it off, Frank continued. The house is free and clear now, and I've transferred it solely to your name. He can't touch it unless you allow it. Why would he do this? I finally managed to ask, my voice breaking. Debt. They're drowning in it. Credit cards, their mortgage, the cars. They're living far beyond their means, and it's all catching up to them. Frank reached across the desk and took both my hands in his. Zoe, listen to me carefully. After I'm gone, Troy will come looking for money. He'll assume there's a substantial inheritance. You must not tell him about the villa or the pension fund. If he finds out about them, he'll try to take control, claiming you're too emotional or incapable of managing your affairs. Promise me you'll keep this secret. I promised, though the thought of keeping such secrets from my only child felt wrong. But Frank had never steered me wrong in 45 years of marriage, and I trusted his judgment implicitly. As we drove home, Frank added one more request. Let him think he's getting the house. It will keep him from looking deeper into our finances. Just promise me you'll find the strength to stand up to him when the time comes. I will, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, as Frank slept beside me, I wept silently. Not just for my husband's impending death, but for the son I had already lost without realizing it. The day we buried Frank was unseasonably warm for Seattle in early spring. The cemetery was filled with colleagues from his firm, neighbors, and friends from our 45 years together. I wore the blue dress Frank always loved, clutching a handkerchief he had given me on our 20th anniversary. Troy and Heather arrived late, just as the service was beginning. Heather wore an outfit that seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a funeral, complete with designer sunglasses she never removed. Troy put his arm around me for the benefit of the gathered mourners, but it felt stiff and performative. I noticed him scanning the crowd, nodding to Frank's business partners, making sure he was seen grieving appropriately. During the reception at our home afterward, Troy stayed close to Frank's senior colleagues, engaging them in lengthy conversations. I overheard snippets about investments and market opportunities. Not once did he mention his father's kindness, his wisdom, his patience, all the bedtime stories and fishing trips and life lessons. It was as if Troy was at a networking event rather than his father's funeral. Heather spent most of the reception examining our home, opening cabinet doors when she thought no one was looking, running her fingers over furniture pieces, assessing their value. I caught her taking photos of Frank's desk in his home office. When our eyes met, she quickly pocketed her phone and mumbled something about preserving memories. As guests began to leave, Troy finally approached me, Heather at his side. "Mom, we need to discuss practical matters," he said, his voice all business. "The will, the house, Dad's investments. Have you spoken with his lawyer?" "Your father just went into the ground, Troy," I said quietly. "Can we have one day to honor his memory before discussing his assets?" Troy had the decency to look embarrassed, but Heather jumped in. "Of course, Zoe, but these things need to be handled promptly. Estate taxes and all that. Frank would want his affairs settled quickly." I looked at this woman who had spoken maybe 50 words to my husband in the 5 years she'd been married to Troy, now claiming to know what Frank would want. "His lawyer will contact us next week," I said simply, and walked away to thank other guests for coming. 3 days later, we gathered in the office of Franklin Wheeler, Frank's attorney and old friend. Troy arrived with a notepad and a calculator. Heather wore another expensive outfit and kept checking her watch. "The reading will be brief," Franklin said, putting on his glasses. "Frank's will is straightforward." Troy leaned forward eagerly. I saw Heather squeeze his knee in anticipation. Franklin read the will, which left the house to me with Troy as the beneficiary after my death, and mentioned only a modest savings account of $75,000 to be divided, with $50,000 to me and $25,000 to Troy. The look on Troy's face was one of stunned disappointment. "That's it?" he asked incredulously. "What about his investment portfolio? His retirement accounts? The lake property?" Franklin looked confused. "There is no lake property, Troy. Your parents sold that 10 years ago. As for other assets, your father managed those through his firm, Mrs. Thompson will need to inquire there." Troy turned to me. "Mom, Dad must have had substantial investments. He was a financial advisor for 40 years. I shrugged helplessly, playing the role of the widow who knew nothing about finances. "Your father handled all of that. He gave me an allowance for household expenses." Troy looked frustrated but seemed to accept this. After all, it fit with his perception of me as financially naive. As we left the lawyer's office, I heard him mutter to Heather, "At least we get the house eventually." A week passed. I spent the days sorting through Frank's clothes, donating his suits to a program that helped low-income men prepare for job interviews. Each shirt I folded, each pair of shoes I placed in donation boxes, felt like another small goodbye to the man who had been my whole world since I was 19. Troy called to invite me to dinner at their house on Saturday. "Just casual," he said. "We want to check in on you, see how you're doing." Their home was exactly as I remembered it, ostentatious and impersonal, like a furniture showroom rather than a place where people actually lived. Chrome and glass everywhere, white carpets, abstract art that clearly meant nothing to either of them, but had probably cost thousands. Heather served an elaborate meal she had obviously catered, but presented as her own cooking. I pretended not to notice the takeout containers in their kitchen trash can. After dinner, Troy led me to their living room and sat me down on their uncomfortable modern couch. "Mom, we've been thinking about your future," he began, his tone gentle but patronizing. "We're concerned about you rattling around in that big house all alone," Heather added, sitting beside Troy and taking his hand in a show of unified concern. "It's only 3 bedrooms," I pointed out. "Still, it's a lot to maintain at your age," Troy continued. "The yard work, the maintenance, the stairs." I waited, already knowing where this was headed. "We've done some research," Heather said, reaching for a stack of glossy brochures on their coffee table. "These are some lovely assisted living communities in the area." Troy quickly added, "Not nursing homes, Mom. Independent living apartments with some support services. You'd have your own place, but there'd be people checking in on you, activities, meals if you want them." I looked through the brochures, noting the sterile environments poorly disguised by bright color schemes and stock photos of smiling seniors. "These look very expensive," I commented. "That's the thing," Troy said, leaning forward. "We've been thinking. The house has a lot of equity. If you sold it, you could easily afford one of these places for many years, and it would take the burden of maintenance off your shoulders." I looked up from the brochures, meeting my son's eyes. "You want me to sell the house?" "For your own good," Heather interjected. "And honestly, Zoe, Troy, and I could use the inheritance advance. Our financial advisor says real estate is a much better investment than leaving money sitting in a paid-off house." There it was. The true motivation laid bare with surprising frankness. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "And how soon were you thinking I should make this move?" Troy and Heather exchanged glances. "Well," Troy said, clearing his throat, "we were thinking about doing some renovations to our place, adding a proper home office for me and upgrading the kitchen. If we could access some of that equity sooner rather than later." "We've actually started getting estimates," Heather added. "The contractor says he could start next month if we put down a deposit soon." I stared at them, these strangers who were my son and daughter-in-law. They were planning renovations based on money they expected to get from selling my home. From selling the house where Troy had grown up, where Frank and I had built our life together. "This is all very sudden," I said carefully. "Frank has only been gone a few weeks. I'll need some time to think about it." Troy looked disappointed but nodded. "Of course, Mom. Just don't wait too long. The best units at Sunny Pines get snatched up quickly." As I left their house that evening, Troy walked me to my car. "Maybe next week you could start looking at which of these facilities you prefer," he suggested. "Heather and I would be happy to take you on tours." "That's thoughtful," I said, not committing to anything. "How soon were you hoping I'd move out?" Troy had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Well, the contractor said if we want to be done before the holidays, we should start by June at the latest. So maybe you could be settled somewhere new by the end of May?" May. It was now early April. They wanted me out of my home within 6 weeks, less than 2 months after burying my husband. "I'll do my best," I said, getting into my car. As I drove home, I felt something harden inside me. Frank had been right about everything, and now I understood why he had gone to such lengths to protect me. The next morning, I called Angela and arranged to meet her for coffee. It was time to learn exactly what Frank had set up for my future, because I was going to need it much sooner than either of us had anticipated. For the next 2 weeks, I pretended to consider the senior living options Troy and Heather had presented. I requested brochures from additional facilities, asked questions about amenities and costs, and generally played the role of a widow reluctantly accepting her new circumstances. "This one has water aerobics classes," I told Troy over the phone, injecting false enthusiasm into my voice. "And they allow small pets." "That's great, Mom," he replied, clearly pleased that I was cooperating. "Heather and I can take you to see it on Saturday." Meanwhile, I was carefully organizing my important documents and personal treasures. photos of Frank and me throughout our 45 years together, the love letters he wrote me when we were dating, the special jewelry he had given me on anniversaries, nothing flashy or terribly valuable, but precious to me because of the love behind each gift. I had begun packing these items when I wasn't expecting Troy or Heather to visit. Small boxes hidden in my closet, ready to be shipped when the time came. Angela had been tremendously helpful, connecting me with an international moving company that specialized in relocations to Spain. On Tuesday afternoon, I had an appointment to view one of the senior facilities. I deliberately left my house unlocked, something I never normally did, and positioned some financial statements conspicuously on the kitchen table before leaving. I had a suspicion that Troy might use my absence as an opportunity to snoop, and I wanted to see if I was right. I returned home 30 minutes earlier than expected, having made an excuse about a headache to cut the tour short. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Troy's car parked across the street, partially hidden by a neighbor's large SUV. My heart sank. My son was in my house, without my knowledge or permission. Rather than confront him immediately, I quietly entered through the side door that led directly into the kitchen. I could hear voices coming from my bedroom upstairs, Troy's and Heather's, but also a third voice I didn't recognize. I removed my shoes and crept up the carpeted stairs, careful to avoid the third step that always creaked. The door to my bedroom was ajar, and I could clearly hear the conversation inside. "The carpet definitely has to go," said the unfamiliar voice, a woman's. "And these drapes are at least 20 years out of style." "We'll be gutting the whole room," Troy replied, "knocking down this wall to expand the primary suite." "The closet space is pathetic," Heather added. "My shoes alone need twice this much space." I peered through the crack in the door. Troy and Heather were in my bedroom with a woman in a blazer who was taking measurements and making notes on a tablet. A real estate agent or interior designer, I guessed. "How soon can we close?" the woman asked. "The buyer is flexible," Troy said. "But we'd like to move fast. My mother has agreed to move to assisted living. She just doesn't know we've already sold the house." My blood ran cold. They had already sold my house, without my knowledge or consent. "And she's signed the power of attorney?" the woman asked. Heather laughed lightly. "Not yet, but she will. She's completely overwhelmed by all the financial details. She'll sign whatever Troy puts in front of her." "We've told her we'll handle everything," Troy explained. "She's always been hopeless with money. My dad managed everything, and now she's looking to me to take over that role." "Well, this place has good bones," the woman said. "But it needs a complete update to get top dollar in this market. The kitchen is straight out of the 90s, and don't get me started on those bathrooms." "The sale is already final," Troy said. "We took a slightly lower offer for a cash deal and quick closing. No contingencies. We close next week." Next week. They had sold my home out from under me, and I was supposed to be out in 7 days. "What about your mom's stuff?" the woman asked. "We'll have an estate sale for most of it," Heather replied. "It's all outdated anyway. She can take some personal items to her little apartment, but there won't be room for much." "And the money from the sale?" the woman inquired. Troy laughed. "Officially, it goes into a trust for her care. In reality, we need it to cover some outstanding debts. The housing market crashed right after we bought our place, and we're underwater on the mortgage. This cash will clear that up and give us breathing room. Plus the renovations," Heather added. "And I've had my eye on a Range Rover." "What about the senior place?" "Those aren't cheap," the woman commented. "We found one that takes Medicare," Troy said dismissively. "It's not fancy, but it'll do. Mom doesn't need luxury at her age. Most of these old people just sit in front of the TV all day anyway." I felt physically ill listening to them discuss my future with such callous disregard. The home Frank and I had lovingly maintained for decades was nothing but a cash cow to them, and I was a burden to be warehoused as cheaply as possible. "Your dad didn't leave much else?" the woman asked. "Usually these financial advisor types have sizable investment portfolios." "That's the weird thing," Troy said, frustration evident in his voice. "The will only mentioned the house and a small savings account. I'm still trying to track down his other assets. He must have hidden money somewhere. No way he worked all those years and only saved $75,000. He was always secretive about money," Heather added. "Even when he was sick, he wouldn't give Troy straight answers about their finances." "Did you check safe deposit boxes? Offshore accounts?" the woman suggested. "Working on it," Troy replied. "But my mother is useless. She claims she doesn't know anything. Can you believe she never even asked my father what their net worth was? Who does that?" "A woman who trusts her husband," I said loudly, pushing the door open. The three of them froze, their faces registering shock and then guilt as they realized I had overheard everything. "Mom," Troy stammered, recovering quickly. "We were just looking at some renovation possibilities for when you decide to sell, just planning ahead." I looked from my son to his wife to the stranger in my bedroom. "Get out," I said quietly. "All of you. Now." The woman grabbed her tablet and hurried past me. "I'll wait in the car," she muttered to Troy. Heather tried to salvage the situation. "Zoe, we were only trying to help. These big financial decisions can be overwhelming after losing a spouse. Is that why you've already sold my house without telling me? To help me?" My voice was remarkably steady, considering the rage and hurt coursing through me. "Mum, let me explain," Troy began. "You've explained plenty already," I cut him off. "I heard everything. The cash sale, the closing next week, your underwater mortgage, Heather's Range Rover, the cheap facility where you planned to dump me." Troy's face hardened. "You weren't supposed to be home yet." "Clearly," I replied. "That made it easier to go behind my back." "We were going to tell you tonight," Heather said, not sounding the least bit convincing. "We just wanted to have all the details arranged first, to spare you the stress." "How considerate," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Now get out of my house." Troy tried one more approach. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't manage this place alone. Dad always handled everything. You don't even know how to change the furnace filter." It was such a small, petty criticism, but it broke something inside me. "Your father visited hospice 3 times a week during his last months," I said quietly. "Where were you, Troy?" 3 brief visits in 5 months. Too busy to sit with your dying father, but not too busy to catalog his possessions while he was still breathing. Troy's face flushed red. It was depressing, seeing him like that, wasting away. "You know I've never been good with hospitals and sickness." "No, you've never been good with anything that doesn't benefit you directly," I replied, my voice steady. "Your father saw it. He knew exactly who you've become. That's why he protected me from you." Confusion crossed Troy's face. "What are you talking about?" I realized I'd said too much in my anger. "Nothing. Just get out, both of you." "This is ridiculous," Heather snapped. "The house is already sold, Zoe. The papers are signed. You're moving out next week whether you like it or not." "We'll see about that," I replied. Troy's expression changed, becoming calculating. "Mom, whose signature is on those sale documents? Who has legal authority to sell this house?" A chill ran through me. Had they forged my signature? Was that what they had done? "We'll discuss this tomorrow when everyone's calmer," Troy said, taking Heather's arm. "Come on, we're leaving." As they brushed past me, Troy paused. "By the way, Dad's watch collection, The one in the safe deposit box. I'll need the key for that." I stared at my son, a stranger wearing a familiar face. "There is no watch collection, Troy. Your father pawned those watches years ago to pay off the loan you took against our house. The one with the forged signatures." Troy's face went pale. "He knew about that?" "He knew about all of them," I said quietly. "Every loan, every forgery, every theft. He paid them all off without telling you. He kept hoping you would change." Troy stood frozen for a moment, then pulled Heather toward the stairs. "She's making it up. Dad never said anything to me." "Of course he didn't," I called after them. "He was protecting you from the consequences of your actions. He was still trying to be a father to a son who didn't deserve it." I heard the front door slam, then the sound of their car starting and speeding away. I sank onto my bed, shaking with adrenaline and shock. The betrayal was even deeper than Frank had predicted. They hadn't just planned to take my home. They'd already sold it without my knowledge or consent. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and called Angela. "We have a problem," I told her. "A big one." Angela arrived at my house within the hour, concern etched on her face. Frank's longtime colleague and friend had become my lifeline in the weeks since his death. She brought with her a young man she introduced as Elliot, an attorney specializing in elder law and estate fraud. "Tell us exactly what happened," Angela urged, sitting beside me at the kitchen table while Elliot took notes. I recounted everything I'd overheard, feeling sick again as I repeated Troy and Heather's callous words about my future. "They've already sold the house," I concluded. "Closing next week," they said. "But how is that possible? Frank transferred the house solely to my name. Troy has no legal right to sell it." Elliot looked grim. "Unfortunately, there are several possibilities, none of them good. They might have forged your signature on sale documents, or they might have tricked you into signing papers you didn't understand." "I haven't signed anything," I insisted. "Are you absolutely certain?" Angela asked gently. "Sometimes these things can be slipped in with other documents. Bills, insurance forms, anything requiring a signature." I thought back over the past few weeks. Troy did bring over some insurance paperwork last week, said it was related to Frank's life insurance policy. I signed several pages. Elliot and Angela exchanged looks. "Did you read everything before signing?" Elliot asked. I felt foolish, as I admitted. Not every word. There were many pages of fine print. Troy said it was standard paperwork, just formalities. "We need to see those papers," Elliot said. "Do you have copies?" I shook my head. Troy took everything with him. Said he needed to submit them to the insurance company. "We'll need to move quickly," Elliot said. "If they've forged documents or tricked you into signing a power of attorney or property transfer, we have limited time to contest it." Angela squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, Zoe." Frank prepared for something like this. He didn't know exactly what form Troy's actions might take, but he knew they would come. She opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. Frank documented everything. Every loan Troy took out using forged signatures. Every payment Frank made to cover those loans. He has copies of the forged documents, bank records, everything. Elliot leafed through the folder, looking increasingly confident. "This is excellent. It establishes a pattern of fraudulent behavior. If they forged your signature on property documents, this history will help us tremendously in court." "Court?" I repeated weakly. "I might have to take my own son to court?" "It may not come to that," Angela said gently. "But we need to be prepared for all possibilities." Elliot pulled out another document. "First things first. We need to verify who currently holds the deed to this property." He made several phone calls, speaking in legal terminology I couldn't fully follow. When he hung up, his expression was serious, but determined. "The good news is that the house is still in your name, Mrs. Thompson. Frank's transfer of sole ownership to you was properly recorded. The bad news is that there is indeed a pending sale, scheduled to close next Tuesday. Your signature appears on the documents." "But I never signed anything related to selling the house," I protested. "Which means the signature is almost certainly forged," Elliot concluded. "We'll need to file an emergency injunction to stop the sale, and then pursue criminal charges for the forgery." Criminal charges. Against my own son. The thought made me physically ill. Angela seemed to read my thoughts. "Zoe, I know this is devastating, but remember what Frank told you. Troy has made his choices. Now you have to protect yourself." Elliot was already on his phone again, speaking rapidly to a colleague about filing for the injunction. Meanwhile, Angela showed me more documents from her file. "Frank left this letter for you," she said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think that time is now." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Zoe," it began. "If you're reading this, then Troy has made his move sooner rather than later. I hoped I was wrong about our son. Every father wants to believe the best of his child. But I've watched Troy's choices over the years with growing concern, and I've seen how he and Heather look at what we have with calculating eyes." Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading. "The hardest part of dying isn't leaving the world," Frank had written. "It's leaving you unprotected. That's why I've made these arrangements. The villa in Spain is your fresh start. The pension fund will keep you comfortable for the rest of your life. Troy knows nothing about either, and it must stay that way." Frank's letter continued, his words speaking to me from beyond the grave with the same wisdom and love that had guided our marriage for 45 years. "You've always been stronger than you know, Zoe. You see yourself as the quiet one, the supporter, the one who followed my lead. But I've always seen the steel beneath your gentleness. Now it's time for you to see it too." The final paragraphs broke my heart all over again. "I've struggled with what kind of father this makes me, hiding assets from my own son. But I've concluded that truly loving our children doesn't mean giving them everything they want. Sometimes it means allowing them to face the consequences of their actions. Troy needs to find his own way now, without the safety net of his parents' resources. I love you more than I can express, Zoe. Build a beautiful new life in Spain. Make new friends. Plant flowers on that bougainvillea-covered porch. Swim in the Mediterranean. Live fully. That's how you'll honor our life together. All my love. For all my life and beyond, Frank." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, my tears now flowing freely. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew exactly what would happen." Angela nodded. Frank was an excellent judge of character. It broke his heart to see what Troy had become, but he was determined to protect you. Elliot ended his call and rejoined us. "My colleague is filing the injunction right now. We'll have it by morning, which will legally prevent the sale from proceeding. I've also contacted a handwriting expert who can examine the forged signatures, and I've scheduled a meeting with a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit." My head was spinning. This is moving so quickly. "It has to," Elliot explained. "Based on what you've told me, Troy and Heather are in financial trouble, underwater on their mortgage, other debts pressing on them. People in that situation make desperate choices. We need to move decisively to protect your assets." "What about the villa in Spain?" I asked. "Should I tell Troy about it now? Maybe if he knew there was another property, he wouldn't be so desperate to sell this one." Angela and Elliot exchanged glances. Absolutely not, Angela said firmly. Frank was explicit about this. If Troy finds out about the villa or the pension fund, he'll try to gain control of those too. Right now, those assets are safely out of his reach. They need to stay that way. Besides, Elliot added, based on what you've told me, they wouldn't use the money from the Spanish property to stabilize their finances. They'd use it to maintain their unsustainable lifestyle for a little longer. The Range Rover, the renovations, the luxury items, none of that addresses their fundamental financial problems. I knew they were right. Troy and Heather didn't need a financial rescue. They needed a complete change in how they viewed money and responsibility. Giving them access to more resources would only enable their destructive patterns. "What do we do next?" I asked, feeling more resolved than I had since overhearing their conversation in my bedroom. "You'll stay in a hotel tonight," Angela said. "I don't want you alone in this house in case Troy comes back. Tomorrow morning, we meet with the detective. After that, we confront Troy and Heather with what we know." "And then?" I asked. Angela looked at me compassionately. "Then you decide how far you want to take this, Zoe. We can simply block the fraudulent sale and leave it at that, or we can pursue criminal charges for the forgery. That choice will be entirely yours." As I packed an overnight bag, I thought about Frank's letter, about the strength he always saw in me that I'd never fully recognized in myself, about his belief that sometimes love means allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. For the first time since Frank's diagnosis, I felt a glimmer of hope for my future. Not the future I'd planned, growing old with my husband in our Seattle home, but a different future. One with a bougainvillea-covered porch overlooking the Mediterranean. One where I would find the strength Frank had always seen in me. I looked around our bedroom one last time before leaving with Angela, my gaze lingering on the photographs of Frank and me through the decades. "I'll make you proud," I whispered to his smiling image. "I promise." The next morning moved with dizzying speed. Elliot secured the emergency injunction blocking the sale of the house. The handwriting expert confirmed that my signature on the sale documents was indeed forged. Detective Parker from the Financial Crimes Unit reviewed the evidence and agreed there was sufficient cause to investigate. "We have two options," Detective Parker explained as we sat in Elliot's office. "We can build a criminal case for fraud and forgery, which would likely result in charges being filed. Or we can use the threat of charges to negotiate a settlement." I thought about my son, the little boy who once brought me dandelion bouquets and handmade cards, the teenager who played saxophone in the high school band, his face lighting up when he saw Frank and me in the audience. Somewhere inside the man he'd become, that boy still existed. I had to believe that. "I don't want Troy to go to jail," I said, "but he needs to understand the seriousness of what he's done. And I need to be protected from any future attempts to take what's mine." Detective Parker nodded. "That's a reasonable approach. We can arrange a meeting where we present the evidence and outline the potential charges. Often, the reality check of seeing the consequences laid out is enough to secure cooperation." "Let's do that," I agreed. "Today, if possible." Elliot made the calls, and by early afternoon, a meeting was arranged at his office. Troy and Heather were told only that it concerned the house sale and that they should bring their real estate agent and any documents related to the transaction. Angela stayed with me as we waited for the meeting to begin. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently. "No," I admitted. "But it needs to be done. Frank protected me as long as he could. Now I have to protect myself." Troy and Heather arrived precisely at 3:00, looking confident and slightly annoyed. Their real estate agent, the woman I had seen in my bedroom, followed behind them, clutching a folder of documents. Their expressions faltered slightly when they saw Detective Parker, identifiable by the badge clipped to his belt. "Mom, what's going on?" Troy asked, his tone somewhere between concerned and defensive. "Why is there a police officer here?" Elliot took charge of the meeting, gesturing for everyone to sit at the conference table. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'm Elliot Blackwell, your mother's attorney. This is Detective Parker from the Financial Crimes Unit." "Financial crimes?" Heather repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What does that have to do with us?" Elliot placed several documents on the table. "These are the sale documents for Mrs. Thompson's house on Elmwood Drive. They purport to bear her signature, authorizing you, Troy, to act as her agent in the sale." "That's right," Troy said, a slight tremor in his voice. "Mom signed them last week. She's been planning to move to assisted living." I spoke for the first time. "I never signed those papers, Troy. I never authorized you to sell my house." Troy's face flushed. "Yes, you did. With the insurance forms, remember? You mean the forms you told me were for Dad's life insurance policy?" I asked quietly. "The ones with all the fine print you said was just standard language." Heather jumped in. "This is ridiculous. You're just having second thoughts. You signed the papers, Zoe." Detective Parker slid another document across the table. "This is the report from our forensic handwriting expert, confirming that the signatures on these documents are forgeries. Not very sophisticated ones, either." The real estate agent blanched, gathering her papers. "I was assured these documents were legitimate. I had no knowledge of any forgery." "Sit down, please," Detective Parker said firmly. "We're not finished," Elliot continued. "We've also documented a pattern of similar financial fraud going back several years." He placed Frank's folder on the table. "Mr. Thompson kept meticulous records of previous instances where his son forged signatures to obtain loans against the family home." Troy's face went completely white. "That's not. Dad never said anything about." "He paid them off quietly," I said. "Every time. He kept hoping you would change, Troy. He kept believing the son he raised was still in there somewhere." Heather turned to Troy, her expression stunned. "What is she talking about? What loans?" Troy ignored her, focusing on me with growing desperation. "Mom, you can't do this to us. We need the money from the house. We're in trouble here." "I know," I replied calmly. "Underwater on your mortgage, credit card debt, loans coming due. I heard everything when you were in my bedroom yesterday, planning my future without bothering to consult me." Detective Parker cleared his throat. "Mr. Thompson, forgery and fraud are serious criminal offenses. The pattern established here suggests this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a calculated scheme." "It wasn't like that," Troy protested, his voice rising. "I was going to use the money to take care of Mom. The senior place costs money, you know. The cheap place that takes Medicare?" I quoted his own words back to him. "Where old people just sit in front of the TV all day." Troy had the grace to look ashamed. "You weren't supposed to hear that." "Clearly," I replied. Heather, seeing the situation deteriorating rapidly, changed tactics. "There's been a misunderstanding. We only wanted what's best for everyone. If Zoe doesn't want to sell the house, of course we'll respect that." Elliot wasn't allowing such an easy retreat. It's well past that point. We have documented evidence of forgery, fraud, and an attempt to convert assets rightfully belonging to Mrs. Thompson. The question now is how we proceed. Troy looked desperately from Elliot to Detective Parker to me. "Mom, please, you can't let them do this. Dad would never have wanted me to go to jail." "You're right about that," I agreed. "Your father loved you, Troy. Despite everything, he loved you until his last breath. So you'll drop this?" Hope flickered in Troy's eyes. "No," I said firmly. but I'm willing to discuss alternatives to criminal prosecution, provided certain conditions are met. Troy sagged with relief. Anything. Just tell me what you want. I looked to Elliot, who outlined the terms we had discussed earlier. First, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson will sign a legally binding agreement acknowledging the forgery and fraud and relinquishing any claim to Mrs. Thompson's property. Now or in the future? Troy nodded quickly. Fine, whatever you want. Second, Elliot continued, they will enroll in and complete a financial responsibility course and credit counseling program with regular progress reports submitted to this office. Heather started to object, but Troy cut her off. We'll do it. Third, Mr. Thompson will undergo 50 hours of community service at a senior center, working directly with elderly residents. This condition clearly surprised Troy, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded again. Finally, Elliot concluded, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson will have no involvement in Mrs. Thompson's financial affairs going forward. Any attempt to access her accounts, property, or other assets will result in the immediate filing of criminal charges. Agreed, Troy said quickly before Heather could speak. Is that all? Detective Parker leaned forward. You need to understand something, Mr. Thompson. This agreement doesn't erase what you've done. It's being documented and filed. If there are any similar incidents in the future, with your mother or anyone else, the leniency shown today will not be extended again. Next time, you will face the full force of the law. Troy swallowed hard and nodded. I don't understand, Heather suddenly burst out. If we can't sell the house, how are we supposed to fix our financial problems? We needed that money, Troy. All eyes turned to her, and in that moment, I saw something shift in my son's expression. Perhaps it was hearing his wife speak so nakedly about their intentions. Perhaps it was finally facing the consequences of actions he had taken with the assumption he would never be caught. Whatever it was, I watched as realization dawned on his face. This is my fault, Troy said quietly. All of it. I've made a mess of everything. He turned to me, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't even know how it came to this. Dad taught me better. You both did. Heather stood abruptly. I can't believe you're just giving up like this. After everything we've planned. Planned? Troy repeated, staring at her. You mean after all the lies we've told? The forgeries? The scheming behind my mother's back while my father was barely in his grave? He shook his head. I'm done, Heather. I can't do this anymore. Heather's face hardened. Fine. If you won't do what needs to be done, I'm out of here. Call me when you grow a spine. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the office, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The real estate agent, who had been watching the proceedings with increasing discomfort, spoke up. I had no idea the documents were forged. I'll contact the buyers immediately and explain that the sale cannot proceed. Detective Parker nodded. We'll need a full statement from you about your involvement. As the agent left with Detective Parker, Troy remained seated, looking utterly defeated. I've ruined everything, he said, more to himself than to me. My marriage, my relationship with you, Dad's memory. All for what? A bigger house? A fancier car? I reached across the table and took his hand. It's not too late to make different choices, Troy. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. How can you even stand to look at me after what I've done? Because I'm your mother, I said simply, and because I believe the son your father and I raised is still in there somewhere. Troy broke down then, sobbing like he hadn't since he was a child. Through his tears, the whole story came pouring out. The mountain of debt, Heather's incessant pressure to maintain appearances, the desperation as their financial house of cards began to collapse. None of it excused what he had done, but it helped me understand how my son had lost his way so completely. When he had collected himself, Troy asked the question I had been expecting. "What will you do now, Mom?" "About the house, I mean." I took a deep breath. It was time for the truth, or at least part of it. "I'm moving, Troy, not to assisted living, but away from Seattle entirely." He looked surprised. "Where?" "I'm not ready to share that yet," I said carefully. "I need time to heal, and you need time to get your own life in order. Maybe in the future, when we've both done that work, we can try to rebuild our relationship." Troy nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm grateful you're not pressing charges." He hesitated, then added, "What about Heather?" "That's between you and her," I replied. "But I will say this. Relationships built on appearances and material things rarely withstand serious challenges. You both need to decide what really matters to you." As we prepared to leave Elliot's office, Troy handed me his keys to my house. "I made copies without telling you," he admitted. "I won't come over without your permission again, I promise." It was a small gesture, but it felt like the first honest interaction we'd had in years. "Thank you," I said. We parted awkwardly on the sidewalk outside, neither of us quite ready for a hug or even knowing what to say. But as Troy turned to walk to his car, he paused and looked back at me. "Dad would be proud of you," he said quietly, "standing up for yourself like this. He always said you were stronger than you knew." I smiled, thinking of Frank's letter, saying those exact words. "He was right about a lot of things," I replied. As I watched my son walk away, shoulders slumped in defeat, but perhaps also in relief at having the truth finally exposed, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The path forward was unclear for both of us, but at least it would be built on truth rather than deception. 3 months later, I stood on the bougainvillea-covered porch of my Spanish villa, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and pink. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers, so different from the pine-scented air of Seattle. My new home was smaller than the house I had shared with Frank, but its whitewashed walls and red-tiled roof had already begun to feel like home. The moving process had been both simpler and more complicated than I expected. Simple in that I had brought relatively little with me, just personal treasures and practical necessities. Complicated in the emotions that surfaced with each item I packed or left behind. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every book held memories of the life Frank and I had built together. In the end, I had sold most of the furniture, donating the proceeds to a cancer research foundation in Frank's name. The house itself I decided to rent rather than sell, using a property management company to handle the details. It provided a modest additional income and kept the door open to a possible return someday, though that felt increasingly unlikely as I settled into my new life. The pension Frank had arranged was indeed generous, allowing me to live comfortably without financial concerns. Angela had connected me with an expatriate community in Valencia, and I had quickly made friends among the other Americans and Europeans who had chosen to retire along this sun-drenched coast. My days developed a pleasant rhythm. Morning walks along the beach, Spanish lessons twice a week with Miguel, a patient teacher who didn't mind my mangled pronunciation, lunch with new friends at seaside cafes, afternoons reading or painting watercolors of the breathtaking views. In the evenings sometimes, I sat on this porch and wrote letters to Frank in a journal, telling him about my day, my thoughts, the beauty of this place he had chosen for me. Today, however, I was writing a different kind of letter, a response to Troy, who had written to me a month ago. His letter had been painful to read, but also hopeful in its brutal honesty. He and Heather had divorced, the fractures in their relationship too deep to repair once the facade of their perfect life had crumbled. Troy had downsized dramatically, selling their house and moving to a small apartment. He was working with a financial counselor to address his debt and had enrolled in a program to become a certified addiction counselor, inspired by his volunteer work at the senior center. "I see now what real strength looks like," he had written. "Not in the things you own or the image you project, but in how you face adversity and how you treat others. Dad tried to teach me that. You both did. I just wasn't ready to listen." My reply had been sitting half-finished on my desk for weeks. Today, I finally knew what I wanted to say. Not just hollow forgiveness that avoided the pain we had both experienced, but a path forward based on truth and boundaries. I told Troy about my life in Spain, describing the villa and the view, but not giving my exact location. That would come later, perhaps, when trust had been rebuilt. I shared memories of him as a child, the sweet boy he had been, to remind us both of the foundation we once had. I explained that while I was working on forgiving him, trust would take longer to restore. I set clear expectations for our future relationship, including complete honesty and respect for boundaries. And I expressed hope that the changes he was making would bring him the peace and fulfillment that material possessions never could. As I signed the letter, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me since Frank's death. Not an ending, but a transition to something new. A relationship with my son based on who we both were now, not who we had been or who we wished the other would be. The evening light was fading as I sealed the envelope. From the kitchen, I could hear the timer signaling that the paella I was preparing was ready. I had invited neighbors over for dinner, my first time hosting in my new home, another small step toward building a life here. Before going inside, I paused to look once more at the sea. Frank and I had dreamed of retiring together to a place like this, walking hand in hand along the shore, watching sunsets from this very porch. Life had other plans. But in his final act of love, Frank had given me not just financial security, but also the push I needed to discover my own strength. "I did it, Frank," I whispered to the gentle breeze. "I stood up for myself. I found the strength you always saw in me." I could almost hear his response in the rustle of the bougainvillea blossoms. "I never doubted you would, Zoe." As I turned to go inside, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Angela, checking in as she did every few weeks. "How's the Spanish adventure going?" she asked. I smiled and typed a quick reply. "Better each day. Learning to build a new life while honoring the old one," Frank would approve. The next morning, as I walked along the beach collecting shells, I thought about how differently everything had turned out from what I had planned. A year ago, I had been a wife looking forward to retirement with my husband. Then I became a widow, a target, and finally a woman finding her own path. Frank had seen what I couldn't, that I had the resilience to face whatever came my way. He had protected me as long as he could, then left me the tools to protect myself. The house in Spain, the financial security, but most importantly, the knowledge that I was stronger than I knew. I would always miss Frank. The ache of his absence would never completely disappear, but alongside that grief, something else was growing. Pride in my independence, joy in new friendships, curiosity about what this chapter of my life might hold. Last week, I had enrolled in a watercolor class at the local arts center. Tomorrow, I was joining a group of expatriates for a day trip to a nearby winery. Next month, perhaps, I would consider Troy's request to visit, to see if our fragile new beginning could be nurtured into something meaningful. For now, I bent to pick up a perfect scallop shell, adding it to my collection. The Mediterranean sparkled in the morning sun, endless possibilities stretching to the horizon. I was 68 years old, starting over in a foreign country, and for the first time in my life, I was standing entirely on my own. And I was not afraid. Life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes it takes detours through heartbreak and betrayal. But if we're lucky, those difficult roads lead us to unexpected strength and new beginnings. I never imagined I would find myself widowed, betrayed by my only child, and starting over in a country thousands of miles from the home I had known for decades. But here I was, not just surviving, but truly living. Frank had given me one final precious gift: the opportunity to discover who Zoe Thompson could be on her own terms. Not just Frank's wife or Troy's mother, but a woman with her own strength, her own dreams, her own life to live. I looked out at the endless blue of the Mediterranean and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered to Frank, to the universe, to myself, for the lessons learned through pain, for the strength found in adversity, for the peace discovered in starting anew. The most valuable inheritance Frank left me wasn't the villa or the pension fund. It was the belief that I could face whatever came my way, that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined, that it's never too late to begin again. Have you ever had to start over when you least expected to, or discovered strength in yourself that you didn't know you had? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of resilience and renewal. And if you know someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength, please share this with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you courage and hope on whatever path life takes you next.